One waterway bound China's north and south for 1,000 years. It fed capitals, steadied markets, and moved armies on time. The Grand Canal was built, rebuilt, and kept alive across dynasties. It outlived wars, floods, and a river that changed its course. Parts still work today. Stay with me and see how a canal became a living system. We will follow the canal from idea to upkeep. First, the geography and the food problem that forced action. Then, the big build, linking river basins and crossing water divides. We open the locks, manage levels, and fight silt and floods. We watch the daily protocol, convoys, schedules, signals, inspections. We track the grain tribute and the money that paid for repairs. We meet the institutions that kept memory and discipline. We stress test the system through crises and modernization. By the end, you get a clear 6-point model for long-lived infrastructure you can apply to any major project. Northern China housed courts, arsenals, and garrisons. Southern China grew vast rice surpluses under warm, wet skies. Between them lay rivers with shifting moods, low divides that still mattered, and long stretches of coast that turned hostile each storm season. Moving food north and power south was the central problem. The answer had to work every year, not only in lucky summers. Coastal shipping looked easy on a map. In practice, it was slow, seasonal, and risky. Typhoons shut routes for weeks. Sandbars moved after every storm. Pirates and wreckers knew the weak points. A single storm season could erase 60 days from the calendar. Armies and capitals could not wait that long. Overland carts were worse. Grain is heavy and bulky. Ox teams sank into clay after rain. Bridges failed under repeated loads. 100 carts moved less than one medium convoy of rivercraft. Roads needed constant repair and toll stations multiplied delays. Rivers offered speed but not a direct path. The Yangtze flows east to the sea. The Yellow River swerves, rises, and drops silt by the mountain. The Huai River sits between them like an interrupted sentence. A natural north-south corridor did not exist. Pieces were there, but they did not meet cleanly. Local canals had existed for centuries. Farmers cut short ditches to drain fields or float harvest to market towns. Regional rulers joined nearby streams to avoid dangerous rapids. These works solved village problems, not state problems. They lacked depth, width, and any common rules. A convoy that fit one cut jammed in the next. The capital's needs set the scale. Feeding hundreds of thousands demanded predictable tonnage every month. The court also needed timber, iron, and salt. Taxes had to move without loss. A single grain convoy could feed 1 million mouths for weeks. When you stack needs like this, improvisation fails. The state had to build a controlled water spine. Climate pushed in the same direction. Southern monsoons filled paddies and rivers. Northern plains rode through droughts and hard freezes. To even out these cycles, the food pulse had to move north during safe windows. Timing meant survival. Any system that missed the window would trigger price spikes and unrest. Terrain chose the battleground. The challenge was not mountains but water divides only a few meters high. Boats cannot climb hills alone. Water must be raised, lowered, and held steady against leaks and silt. That calls for locks, feeder ponds, and embankments that do not burst in night rain. It also calls for trained crews and daily discipline. Silting was a silent enemy. The Yellow River carried more sediment than most rivers on Earth. One flood could lift its bed above the surrounding plain. When that silt reached connecting channels, depth vanished. Boats grounded and schedules failed. Any durable plan needed both a route and a yearly fight against mud. Political geography mattered as much as soil. When the capital sat in the north, the corridor had to serve it first. Grain tribute fixed the baseline load. By making the state the anchor client, the route could afford dredging and repairs. Markets would then layer on top of that baseline and make the system breathe. Harbors and market towns form beads along the route. They needed warehouses, boatyards, and rope makers. Each node reduced risk. A damaged hull could be patched within a day. A late convoy could store grain safely under guard. This support chain turned a line on the map into a working artery. Standard sizes were essential. Boats too wide at one lock wasted hours. Draft too deep on a shallow reach trapped whole convoys. The state would have to declare preferred hull dimensions, towline rules, and passing etiquette. Only then could thousands of boats share a narrow band of water without chaos. Seasonal rules completed the frame. Spring floods punished impatience. Winter ice punished delay. Schedules had to cluster departures for safety, then spread arrivals to avoid choke points. Even today, reliable navigation is as much a calendar as engineering. In this project, the calendar would be law. Security followed the cargo. The route carried wealth in slow motion. Patrol posts, signal towers, and night anchorages reduce theft and rumor. Piracy on a canal is less profitable than at sea when lights and eyes dot every bend. That is why a dense chain of watch points mattered as much as depth markings. Local labor knew the rivers, but central oversight had to align them. Each reach needed a responsible master with the tools and budget to act before problems spread. If a bank slumped at dusk, men and baskets had to arrive before midnight. Small failures, handled fast, prevented disasters that cut a province off for weeks. The social contract sat under the waterline. Farmers upstream had to accept reservoirs and controlled releases. Fishermen had to accept channel rules that limited nets near locks. Boatmen had to accept queues and inspections. In return, they gained stable work, safer passages, and courts that punished rule breakers. Measurement made the system honest. Depth poles, flow gauges, and simple ledgers turned guesswork into plans. When a reach lost 10 centimeters of depth in a week, crews could schedule dredging before hulls scraped. When convoys missed targets, dispatchers could adjust windows rather than issue blame. Maps were living tools, not wall art. Surveyors walked banks, sounded channels, and updated sandbar positions. New editions circulated before the next season. Margins carried notes in plain language for pilots. A map that matched reality saved more money than a dozen speeches about diligence. The project's scale demanded redundancy. Alternate cuts around fragile bends created safety valves. Emergency spillways took pressure off main banks during night storms. Storage lakes buffered droughts. Reserve crews rotated in for peak seasons. With backups in place, the route could fail gracefully instead of catastrophically. Every gain upstream magnified downstream. A single cleared bend improved schedules for hundreds of kilometers. A well-placed feeder kept 3 locks efficient all season. The system rewarded maintenance in quiet months. That is why budgets had to favor prevention over heroic rescue after collapse. All of these threads point to the same conclusion. Geography did not command a canal, it invited one under strict conditions. The state had to knit rivers, cuts, and marsh edges into one disciplined path. The path had to carry grain first, then everything else. The calendar had to rule men and water equally. This is the moment where intent turns into design. The need is clear, the terrain is mapped, and the risks are named. What remains is the decision to link basins with continuous depth and controlled levels. In the next part, we will see how that decision turned scattered waterways into a single spine, and how the first great building push set the standards others would follow. A central order turned scattered waterways into one goal. The route had to connect river basins with continuous depth and predictable levels. Surveyors walked the banks with poles and cords. They marked high ground, soft soils, and existing cuts that could be widened. The first rule was simple and strict. Shorten the path, avoid sharp bends, and keep towpaths clear for people and animals. Route selection decided everything that followed. A line drawn 5 kilometers too far west meant more marsh and more leaks. A line drawn over a slightly lower ridge saved months of digging. Crews staked the alignments with tall markers visible from the next bend. When fog rolled in at dawn, the markers still kept the spade lines true. Straightening old channels gave instant gains. Crews cut through necks of meanders and left the old loops as quiet ponds. Every removed bend reduced turbulence and bank wear. Towpaths were raised a little above flood level and packed with gravel. A dry towpath meant an animal kept its footing. That alone gave a convoy another 10 kilometers per day. The state mobilized a layered workforce. Local farmers worked off tax obligations during slack months. Skilled diggers and carpenters moved between sections with foremen. Blacksmiths repaired tools on site. Supply teams brought wood, fiber ropes, lime and oil for lanterns. Field kitchens followed the crews, so time was not lost to long walks back to village hearths. Work blocks were sized to finish before the next rain cycle. A foreman owned a length of bank and a number of culverts. He knew the expected volume of earth and the date for inspection. If a section failed under the first test flow, the same crew fixed it before they moved on. In this system, pride and accountability were practical tools. Soils dictated methods. In clay, crews cut clean profiles and compacted the bed with wooden rammers. In sand, they used brush and basket mats to hold banks together while fresh silt settled in. In peat, they laid fascines and slow drained the trench to let the ground find its new shape before full depth was attempted. The right order saved lives and weeks. Bridging towpaths over feeder streams solved a constant annoyance. Instead of dropping tow lines and reattaching them each time, boats passed under simple timber spans. These small structures multiplied efficiency across a whole season. A convoy that kept its rhythm reached the lock gates before dark. That was the difference between sleeping at anchor or pushing into the night. Standard widths and depths arrived with the first large push. The digging lines used a simple staff with notches for bank slope and channel bottom. Crews checked against the staff every few meters. Boats built to the standard could count on clearance even at late-season low water. Deviations were corrected immediately. The channel was a promise kept in wood and mud. A pilot section always came first. The administration chose a reach with varied soils and at least one minor divide. They built it fast, ran test boats, and fixed the weak points. The measured time from first spade to first convoy became the planning unit for the next reaches. Each success lowered risk elsewhere because it exposed hidden problems early. Logistics kept pace with digging. Rafts of timber were assembled upstream and drifted down to new work fronts. Stone moved on ox carts only on the driest days, then switched to barges as soon as water could carry the load. Rope and canvas were stockpiled in shaded sheds near the waterline. A missing item at the wrong time could idle 200 men. Planners learned to keep critical spares within a short walk. Security and order moved with the frontier. Temporary watch posts lit the bank at night. Disputes over wages or stolen tools were settled at the post rather than festering in camps. When workers felt heard and paid, desertion fell. That kept crews intact long enough to become fast and safe at their assigned tasks. A simple signaling system reduced accidents. Day flags showed whether a section was open to boat traffic or reserved for works. Night lantern codes warned of fresh embankments and shallow spots. Boat captains learned the codes before entering the active zone. One missed signal could cost a hull and a week. With signals, the build site and the river could share space. The first water divide crossings demanded new thinking. Boats cannot be dragged over the crest at scale. Water must rise with them. Temporary holding ponds were dug on both sides of the summit and fed by small streams. Controlled cuts then connected the ponds to the new channel. The water met in the middle, settling the bed and proving the grade before any permanent structure was set. Quality checks were physical, not paper. Inspectors sounded the bed with poles and watched for spring boils that hinted at seepage under the bank. They walked the outer slope and checked for hairline slumps after a night rain. If a section held its shape for 3 storms and a fortnight of traffic, it passed. If not, the foreman fixed it under the same flag. Unexpected finding: a single well-placed feeder, cut from a small hillside stream, stabilized 3 kilometers of channel through a dry spell. That lesson spread fast. Planners began to inventory every reliable trickle within walking distance of the line. Small waters, multiplied and scheduled, beat one big and brittle reservoir. The first convoys were staged as proofs. Boats were loaded with grain sacks and timber to design weight. Tow teams were set at conservative strength. The convoy departed at dawn, met the first straightened reach by noon, and aimed to reach the test lock site before dusk. Timekeepers wrote down every delay, every hard pull, every shallow scrape. Those notes rewrote work orders within days. A short, sharp story sealed confidence. One early convoy reached the capital's outskirts weeks ahead of the usual sea route. Prices in the markets did not spike despite a poor coastal season. Word ran down the line. Morale in the camps rose because men now felt the point of every basket of soil they had moved. Rules emerged from these trials. Standard hull dimensions were published for builders. Tow teams were matched to boat size and current. Passing etiquette gave upstream convoys priority in narrow cuts. Night movement was limited to short, familiar sections with prearranged signals. Each rule cut one class of mishap out of the calendar. Compensation and access were handled in the open. Fields taken for bends and embankments were measured and recorded. Owners were paid in grain or silver according to a visible schedule. Bridges were added where the channel cut village paths. When people saw that losses were noticed and repaired, friction fell and work fronts moved without constant arguments. The administration learned to rotate crews before fatigue degraded safety. 10 days on heavy earthwork, then 5 days on towpath lining or culvert carpentry. This kept skills fresh and injuries down. It also made crews more versatile. When a bank slipped, anyone nearby could start the right repair while the specialist arrived. By the end of the first great push, the project had a working grammar: align, straighten, standardize, feed, inspect, signal, and test under load. The water now moved as planned across sections that had never met before. Boats carried proof of concept to markets that felt the difference in real prices and full warehouses. This set of methods and habits became the base for everything that followed. The next challenge was not just moving water sideways, but lifting and lowering it in a controlled way across uneven ground. The system needed permanent locks, reliable feeders, and a routine for level management that worked in spring flood and autumn shallows alike. That is where we go next. Boats move only when water moves with them. Across uneven ground, that means controlled steps. The channel is broken into pounds, level stretches of water held between gates. A lock is the doorway between pounds. It is a watertight chamber with an upstream gate and a downstream gate. Bring a boat in, close one gate, add or remove water until levels match, then open the other gate. The boat rises or falls without dragging or damage. Once crews learn the rhythm, an entire convoy can move like an elevator on its side. The chamber must be straight, smooth, and strong. Stone or compacted earth forms the walls, faced where needed with timber or brick to resist wear. The floor is flat and sealed. Builders use puddled clay, tamped in layers, to stop seepage. At the gate ends, they set sills that the gates press against to make a seal. A poor sill wastes water and time. A good sill turns the gate into a quiet wall. Gates usually meet in a shallow V pointing upstream. Water pressure helps them seal when closed. Heavy timbers are tied with iron straps and hinges. The hinges sit on stout posts sunk into the bank and braced by dead men buried in dry ground. If a hinge shifts even a finger's width, the gate groans, rubs, and leaks. Lock crews check bolts and wedges every morning before first passage. Water enters and leaves through culverts cut inside the walls or through slots in the gate planks that can be shuttered. A valve keeper opens them slowly. Rushing water pounds a hull against the wall. Gentle flow keeps boats centered and reduces shock to the masonry. Crews watch the waterline on the wall stones. When the ripple calms and levels match, the next gate opens with a handspike and a shout. Feeder ponds sit above the summit pounds. They collect rain and small stream flow. A short intake with a head gate controls release. In drought, the head gate lift by fingers, not by armfuls, to stretch reserves through the navigation season. In wet months, overflow spillways carry excess away from the canal to safe ground. The rule is simple: store quietly, release deliberately, waste nothing. Summit levels are the hardest. They need water added every time a lock cycles because every rise pulls volume downhill. Surveyors choose a summit line with the smallest practical area to reduce loss. Builders ring it with shallow cuts that feed back into the main pound. The idea is to recycle what you can. Every bucket saved at the summit becomes an easier passage 5 locks below. Below the summit, the problem flips. Too much water can build up when many boats descend in a row. Relief sluices stand by at selected bends. With one pull on a rack, their gates drop, letting a measured sheet of water spill into a safe side channel. At night, sluices are closed and marked with lanterns to avoid new currents that surprise the first convoy at dawn. Traffic rules keep the lock cycle clean. Upbound boats declare themselves 2 turns in advance. Downbound boats wait on assigned bollards with tow lines coiled. No one crowds the gate mouth. When the light signal changes or the flag drops, the lead boat enters at walking speed. Tow teams keep a slight tension to stay centered. Children and animals step off the towpath before the last boat clears, so a sudden line swing never takes a foot. Inside the chamber, fenders protect hulls. A pilot uses a boat hook to keep the bow off the wall. The lockmaster calls water in half steps. Midway through the rise, crews pause to check for leaks and to settle the boat. In a fall, the crew opens the lower culverts first, then cracks the upper gate to equalize pressure. Silence is the best sign. If the chamber hisses or rattles, something is wrong. Maintenance is a calendar, not a crisis. In spring, crews scrape weed and slime from walls and steps to restore smooth flow. In early summer, they repack any soft spots with clay and straw. In late summer, with water at its lowest, they inspect foundation stones for scour and add shingle where vortices form. In autumn, they plane gate edges and repaint iron to keep rust from binding the hinges. Winter brings full overhauls. A temporary cofferdam or stop planks turn the chamber into a dry box for repairs. Silt is the creeping thief that shortens depth and jams valves. To fight it, intake mouths sit above the bed, and culverts turn slightly so incoming water swirls and sheds sand into a catch pit. Crews shovel pits at dawn before the first passage. After a storm, the lockmaster orders a scouring run. He drops the upper valves wide and the lower gates a hand's width to send a sheet of water through the chamber. The sheet lifts loose silt and carries it into the lower pound, where a deeper pilot reach can trap it for later removal. Lock size and boat size are married. The state publishes a favored hull length and beam. Boat builders follow because a non-standard hull burns time at every chamber. Tow teams are matched by a simple rule of thumb tied to load and current. A light timber barge may pass on 2 animals. A full-grain boat takes 4 or 6, with relief teams waiting at steep approaches. Schedules group similar boats to reduce wasted water from frequent height changes. The approach to a lock is as important as the lock. Approaches are straight for at least a few boat lengths with clear sight lines. Shallow berms on the offside catch any drift and prevent a hull from riding up the bank. Mooring rings sit at even spacing with solid ground underfoot. At night, a lantern ladder marks depth. 3 lights for deep water, 2 when levels fall, 1 when passage is limited to small drafts. Captains can read their fate from 100 paces. Signals and sound help when fog or rain mutes the bank. A short horn blast requests entry. A long blast signals a stuck valve or an emergency stop. Bell codes from the lockhouse repeat the same messages. When boats and houses share a language, accidents drop. When a code changes for the season, the lockmaster nails a board at the towpath with the new pattern so no one claims confusion later. People make the system humane. The lockmaster runs the water. A deputy writes the log: boat name, cargo, draft, time in, time out, water level, delay reason. A carpenter keeps tools and spare wedges in dry order. A night watch makes sure no one tries a private passage after curfew or steals the iron dogs that hold the gates. Pay is steady and tied to performance. When a chamber runs a week without a mishap and meets its target turns, the crew shares a small bonus. Pride grows out of that. Accidents still happen. A line can snap and whip. A horse can spook. A gate can jam on a floating branch. Drills teach crews to drop the emergency stop plank across the chamber, to use poles to keep a sinking bow out of the gate, and to pull animals back from the edge before panic spreads. Practice turns fear into steps. Boaters respect a lock more when they see a crew move like a single hand. Water budget decides daily capacity. The lockmaster knows the head pond level at dawn. He calculates how many full rises he can afford before noon, how many mixed cycles, and when to hold for refill. If a drought pinches the summit, dispatchers build a ladder. 3 upbound passages grouped, then 2 downbound, to reuse levels and spare the feeders. A convoy that agrees to wait for the ladder gets priority later in the day. Trust replaces argument. Weather inserts itself into every plan. In spring melt, rising water brings driftwood. Crews stretch a floating boom above the gate to stop logs from ramming hinges. In high summer, weed growth chokes culverts. A narrow rake on a pole clears mouths before the first lockage. In early frost, ice forms on gate faces. Sanded steps and warm oil on iron prevent slips and jams. A lock that works in the worst week earns faith for the rest of the year. Small design choices add up to large time savings. A roped handrail along the wall keeps men steady in rain. A sloped recess lets a gate leaf rest clear of the chamber when fully open. A notch on the coping stone marks safe bollard positions so tow lines never foul a hinge. Each of these details saves seconds. Across 100 passages, seconds become an hour. Across a season, an hour becomes a week of extra cargo delivered. The first generation of permanent locks resets expectations. Boatmen plan to the hour, not the day. Merchants stock warehouses with less anxiety. Administrators budget water like money, spending it where it moves the most cargo per turn. The canal is no longer a path that sometimes works. It is a machine with a clock and a ledger. This system still has a natural enemy. When nearby rivers rise, they push silt and brown floods into quiet pounds. Pressure on embankments grows at night, when tired eyes miss the first damp patch on a slope. In the next part, the focus shifts from gentle steps to hard defense. We will face the Yellow River, sudden storms, and the yearly battle with mud that tries to steal depth from every reach. The canal lived beside unruly rivers. The Yellow River carried silt like ground flour. In flood months, it rose fast, turned brown, and looked for new beds. Its load settled in quiet water and raised the bed a little each year. Without constant work, the canal would choke, and banks would soften from the inside out. Defense began long before the first storm. Crews walked embankments at dawn and dusk. They tamped small cracks with clay and straw before they grew. Willows were planted on outer slopes for roots that knit soil. Borrow pits sat at safe distances so fresh clay was always at hand. Gauge boards showed levels at a glance. When a mark passed a red notch, the plan switched from routine to alert. Embankments were layered and simple. A compacted clay core held water back. A sand layer helped drain seepage toward the toe. A turf skin shielded the sun and rain. On bends that felt the main push, crews laid brush mattresses under a line of stakes. The brush broke waves and trapped silt that thickened the skin with every storm. Where currents attacked the foot, men stacked stone in wicker cages and tied them to dead men in the bank. No wall stands without a way to bleed pressure. Relief cuts and sluice gates sat at calculated points. When levels climbed, a keeper pulled a rack and let a measured sheet spill into a side channel. These channels flooded empty fields that had been set aside for that purpose. After the season, they dried as shallow lakes rich with new silt. The idea was to choose where water makes a mess, not to beg it to be kind. Few sections were built on purpose. A short reach of bank had a lower crest and weaker core. In the rarest emergency, it would fail first, steering the flood into a known basin. People hated the idea until they watched a planned break save a town. Repairing a chosen scar was cheaper than rebuilding a river. Silt management was a daily craft. Inlets sat above the bed so sand fell out before the mouth. Behind stone groins set at an angle to the flow, quiet pockets gathered mud. Scows with shallow draft carried the mud away at dawn. In deeper reaches, scouring runs cleared accumulations after storms. Lockmasters coordinated short, heavy releases that sent a clear, far sheet through problem stretches, while crews watched the banks for fresh slumps. The Huai Basin added its own tricks. Shallow lakes spread out over flat ground. Engineers cut feeder ditches that looped back toward the main line. In wet months, the loops stored excess. In dry months, they returned a slow, clean feed. This reduced sudden changes that strained banks and pull tow teams into mud. Inspection culture made defense predictable. Markers recorded high water lines and dates. A section that saw 3 red marks in a decade earned priority funding for heightening and tow work. Foremen kept ledgers of weak spots with plain notes. Damp patch at Willow 3. Smell of clay. Add 2 cartloads. When the same note repeated, crews opened the bank and found the hidden path before it widened into a pipe. Night was the most dangerous time. A damp line on a slope could spread silently. Watchmen carried lanterns with hoods so light did not blind them. They felt earth with bare hands and listened for a hollow sound when they tapped the slope. If a patch turned slick under fingers, they rang a bell and men ran with baskets. Clay went high, brush went low, stone tied the toe. Quick action in the first hour saved weeks. Flood season rules changed behavior. Heavy traffic paused on the most exposed pounds. Tow lines shortened to keep boats from slewing out under gusts. Mooring rings were used in pairs to share shock. Posts at narrows took a fresh wrap of rope so a drifting log could be caught before it hit a gate. Crews stretched boom chains above lock mouths to stop timber that would jam hinges. Not all danger came from above. Seepage under the bank could travel unseen and rise as small boils on the dry side. Crews dug relief wells and filled them with gravel to relieve pressure. A line of small wells along a suspect toe could save the core in a long, wet week. After levels fell, the wells were capped and marked for the next season. Information flowed as fast as water. Flag towers and drum signals relayed warnings. If a section went to alert, 2 upstream sections reduced releases and held traffic. Downstream sections cleared their pounds to accept a surge if a sluice had to open. This choreography mattered more than a famous heroic stand. A river respects timing and preparation, not courage shouted over thunder. Budgets favored the boring. Money paid for willows, brush, gravel, and wages in the months before storms. Crews that met their pre-season checklist earned a bonus if they finished without an emergency breach. If a breach still happened and the log showed missed inspections, the bonus was lost. Simple incentives made care steady, not theatrical. When the Yellow River shifted its course, maps changed and men adapted. The canal could not hold a rogue river in place, but it could step aside and reconnect through safer ground. Temporary cuts bridged the new distance. Old bends were abandoned and marked on charts as hazards. Warehouses moved with the line so cargo stayed near the water. Flexibility turned disaster into a season of hard work instead of a decade of loss. A small story shows how the system learned. One year, a reach failed at the same stake after each major storm. Crews repaired it twice. On the third time, a young carpenter noticed the gatehouse upstream released water in jerks. Each jerk sent a small standing wave against the same bend. The keeper changed to slow, steady release. The stake stayed dry for the rest of the year. Technique can be stronger than stone. After the flood peak, recovery began before memories faded. Crews measured scour depth at known vortices. They replaced lost turf, lifted sagging willows upright, and reset gabions that had slipped. Catch pits near lock mouths were cleaned to the last shovel. The water clarity test decided when to reopen full traffic. If a white paddle vanished within 1 arm's length, dredging continued. When it showed 2 or 3, schedules resumed. Discipline extended to towns. Markets along the route moved stalls back from the bank before storm season. Kilns stopped firing near embankments to prevent cracks from heat. Builders avoided cutting borrow pits too near the tow. If a citizen broke the rules and damage followed, fines repaired the bank first and only later reimbursed private losses. Public safety stood above private hurry. By late season, the system looked calm again. Depths were restored, banks were tight, and signals returned to normal. But the memory of each storm stayed in ledgers and on the ground as thicker brush, higher crests, or a new relief gate. The canal did not aim to defeat water. It aimed to shape where water could be wild and where it had to behave. All of this defense buys time for commerce, but it also sets strict limits. When the river allows, traffic moves. When the river warns, traffic waits or reroutes. That calls for rules, schedules, signals, and patient sequencing so thousands of boats can share a narrow path without wasting a single safe hour. The next part turns from walls and floods to daily operations and the human protocol that keeps the waterway flowing. Traffic on a great canal is not a crowd. It is a sequence. Before dawn, dispatchers post a day's plan at the main staging basins. Grain tribute convoys get fixed windows. Private cargo fills the gaps. Boat captains sign their names next to time slots and draft categories. The rule is clear. The boat that fits the window and the depth gets the slot. Arguments waste water. Schedules save it. Convoys are built to a pattern. Boats of similar draft and beam are grouped together. Loads are checked against simple marks on the hull. If a sack or a timber stack pushes the line under, the captain sheds weight or waits for deeper water. Tow teams gather with harnesses and spare lines. Animals are fed early and watered twice. A hungry mule wastes an hour by noon. Signals govern movement. At first light, a white board at the dispatch house flips to green. Flag stations at the next 3 bends raise paired colors that match the day's direction of priority. Upbound green over white gives the right of way on narrows. Downbound red over white holds at bollards until the board changes. After sunset, lantern ladders on poles repeat the same code. 2 lamps high for open passage. 1 lamp for caution and short drafts only. When fog rolls in, horns and bells carry the same messages with short and long calls. The towpath is its own road with its own rules. Teams travel single file and keep the right. Overtaking happens only at marked laybys with clean ground and fixed rings. Boys walk ahead of teams with poles to catch hidden roots or broken coping. A dropped hoof can pull a line and swing a barge into the bank. If the path softens after rain, crews throw brush and loose stone to stiffen the surface. Farriers sit at intervals with small forges. A lost shoe becomes a 5-minute stop, not a ruined day. Passing etiquette prevents chaos. In straight reaches with room, downbound keeps to the offside and slackens the tow line. Upbound keeps the tow line taut to maintain steerage. Captains slow as their bows come even and exchange a single call to confirm. No one argues the last meter. The next lock will give the time back. Near locks and bridges, no passing is allowed. The rule is repeated so often that new boatmen hear it in their sleep. Moorings are standardized to keep people safe and water lines clear. Rings sit 2 boat lengths apart with sound ground underfoot. Lines are tied with the same 2 knots across the system. 1 knot that holds under strain, and a second that releases under load with a single toggle. At night, moored boats hang a dim stern light low on the water. It helps a late patrol count hulls and keeps a drifting log from surprising a sleeping deckhand. The work of the day rides on small habits. Barges carry fenders of rope and reed to soften the first touch at a wall. Pilots stand with boat hooks ready to push off gently. Captains keep a coil of spare line dry in a box. Crew lists are posted in the wheelhouse with names and duties. When a job is everyone's job, no one does it. When a line snaps in the rain, a hand already knows which hook to grab. Information moves ahead of boats. A runner leaves the dispatch house at dawn with a slate of drafts, cargo types, and expected arrival times for the next 2 locks. He stops at signal towers and writes any changes on the board, then passes the slate to the lockmaster. The master can then plan water budgets and crew rotations. A single slate saves 6 wrong guesses and a dozen curses at the gate. Inspection is daily and constant. Every boat presents a simple pass stamped at the last weighing station. The pass lists origin, cargo type, and declared weight. Inspectors randomize checks using stones from a pouch. If the drawn stone is black, the boat lands for a weigh. If it is white, the boat moves on. The odds are known. Cheats are rare because the penalty is certain. A boat caught light on tribute days loses its slot for a month. Food and rest have a schedule. Midday halts are short and used to reset tow teams. Animals are led to shade, watered, and rubbed with straw. Crews eat simple meals from field kitchens that move along the bank. In one early trial year, administrators tried longer midday breaks to avoid heat. Delays multiplied. The rule changed to frequent short rests and steady pace. The rhythm fits bodies and boats better than a long stop and a late scramble. Breakdowns happen without warning. A tiller pin shears, a rudder jams, a line catches a gate hinge. Salvage crews stand ready with repair kits and a shallow service punt. They clear the approach first. A stranded boat is hauled into a lay-by before repairs begin. Schedules hate drift. Boats are fixed where they do the least harm, not where it is most comfortable to work. The lock cycle follows a script. The lead boat signals its approach 2 turns out with a horn. The lock house answers with a bell. If the pound below is crowded, the master holds the upper culverts and lets 1 more boat clear. Water is money. Opening early for a single hull wastes a turn worth of head. Once the chamber is ready, crews guide the lead boat in and place it against a known mark on the wall. Fenders touch, lines hold, valves open in half steps. The rise or fall takes minutes, not guesses. Counting matters as much as pulling. The log at each lock records time in and out, drafts, delays, and reasons. Dispatchers read the logs at dusk and mark which reaches met target turns. A reach that consistently lags gets a visit from a roving crew chief. He may find a slow valve, a bad habit in signaling, or a towpath dip that costs every team a minute. The fix is specific and small. The gains echo for miles. Tolls and duties are collected without drama. Tribute convoys pass weighing stations on fixed days. Private cargo pays at toll houses where fees are posted in large characters and tallied on 2 identical slips. 1 slip travels with the boat. 1 stays at the house. Periodic audits compare slips to cargo lists and lock logs. Big scams fail because too many sheets must lie in the same pattern. Little scams die because someone always reads. Season shapes protocol. In spring flood, traffic narrows to daylight and known reaches. No new pilots start during high water. In early summer, weed cutters move ahead of convoys and slice channels with long scythes. In autumn, the canal runs heavy with grain tribute and timber for winter fuel. Lock crews extend hours on calm nights under clear rules. In first frost, sand is thrown on steps and towpath slopes. In hard freeze, movement pauses except on short feeder runs. People live by the calendar as much as by the compass. Crowding is solved with staging and patience. Busy junctions have forebays where boats wait with lines already measured. A caller shouts numbers. 3 boats at 4 cubits draft, 2 boats at 3.5. The right set moves as 1. The wrong set waits for the next call. No captain tries to argue his way into the water. He knows his turn is a sum of decisions made days upstream. Safety is practical, not mystical. Children do not ride tow animals. No one stands on a line under strain. No one steps between hull and wall in a rise. At night, lanterns hang at the same height on every boat so eyes judge distance by habit. When a storm rolls over the plain, convoy leaders make for known shelters. An anchored group spreads evenly with lines crossed to share shock. The first rule in bad weather is to stay together where the next decision is obvious to all. Small innovations keep appearing. A captain paints a thin white stripe on the inside of his hull at the exact minimum draft for each reach. He no longer guesses if he can pass. A lock crew replaces a wooden lever with a ratchet on a heavy valve. One hand can now open what took 3. A tow team tries a new yoke spacing and reduces chafing. These tweaks spread because everyone sees the time saved. Disputes are settled near the water, not years later in distant halls. Each reach has a bench and a responsible elder who hears facts and points to the posted rule. If damage is clear, payment is set in grain or silver and due before the boat can depart. When rules are simple and visible, anger has nowhere to grow. People who feel heard help the system work on busy days. Education turns turnover into strength. New pilots ride 2 trips with an old hand and keep a written list of the 10 most dangerous bends. New lockkeepers learn by shadowing the night watch on quiet weeks, then take day shifts under a master. Towlers learn to read the texture of the path with their feet. Training is fast and practical. It makes the system robust when crews change with the season. One season stands out in memory. A poor coastal year forced more cargo inland. Dispatchers opened extra windows at dawn for 6 weeks. Crews slept in short watches. Tow animals rotated every 6 hours instead of 8. Yet schedules held and prices in the capital stayed steady. The reason was not heroics. It was that everyone knew the script and stuck to it under pressure. By late evening, the canal breathes out. Lanterns dim at lock houses. Mooring bells ring in unison down a long reach. The log shows how many turns the chamber made and how much water fell from the head pond. The towpath empties except for the night watch and a few soft hooves on patrol. Tomorrow, the same steps will repeat with different names and cargoes. This predictability is not boring. It is wealth in motion. Daily order does more than move boats. It creates a base load that keeps warehouses full, markets supplied, and craftsmen employed. It also creates a steady stream of tolls and duties that pay for dredging, repairs, and wages in the dull months when no one is watching. The next part follows that money. It shows how grain tribute anchored demand, how fees turned into a maintenance budget, and how towns along the water grew rich by serving the flow. A canal becomes affordable when cargo is certain. Grain tribute gave the route its anchor load. Each year, the state set quotas by prefecture and calendar. Southern barges loaded rice and wheat in measured sacks and moved on fixed windows. The promise was not profit, but certainty. That promise justified dredging, bank work, lock crews, and signal towers through seasons when private trade would have hesitated. Tribute did more than feed a capital. It stabilized prices along the way. Granaries near major locks received a share of the flow and kept reserve stock. When drought hit a county, the local store released grain at a posted price. When harvest was strong, the store bought back to refill with dry, clean sacks. The cycle damped extremes that ruined towns. Merchants learned that sudden famine spikes were less likely on a canal with working depots. The route paid for itself with friction kept honest. Toll houses stood at natural choke points, after a lock flight, before a junction, or at a narrow reach. Fees were posted in large characters and collected in small increments that matched boat size and cargo value. Tribute convoys paid nothing or paid on paper because they were the reason the system existed. Private cargo paid modestly and often. The money flowed into a maintenance fund with set percentages, a share for dredging, a share for structures, a share for wages and winter repairs. Audits knit the money to the mud. Toll slips came in duplicate. One stayed at the house, one rode with the boat. Lock logs recorded passage times and drafts. Waystations stamped cargo and weight at entry and exit. Periodic checks compared 3 sets of numbers. If a house collected light against recorded traffic, the keeper owed the difference before he kept his post. When many sheets aligned, leaks dried up. The effect was simple. People spent less effort on clever theft and more on moving cargo. Warehouses clustered by water level. Some sat at locktails to catch delays and sell storage by the day. Others stood at junctions with ramps for fast loading as soon as a window opened. Safe storage made time a commodity. A merchant could move grain early and hold it for a better price without fear of rot or theft. Warehouse owners made money on volume, not on surprise fees, because reputation moved more cargo than greed. Industry followed the water like iron to a magnet. Boatyards cut timbers, steamed planks, and set ribs to the standard hull sizes published by the administration. Rope makers twisted hemp on long alleys beside the towpath. Foundries cast hinges and ring bolts for locks and moorings. Kilns fired bricks for facing, culverts, and quay walls. Each craft learned the canal calendar. Yards peaked during low water when boats came in for overhaul. Foundries raced before flood season to deliver valve parts and spare gudgeons. The rhythm made labor steadier than in towns that depended on a single harvest. Risk is a tax. The canal reduced it by design and by habit. Boats traveled in convoys through exposed reaches. Patrols and bright signal houses lowered theft and rumor. Toll houses offered simple insurance. For a small fee, a merchant could register cargo for partial compensation in case of loss inside a defined zone. The payout came from a pooled pot financed by those small fees. The terms were plain enough that captains understood what was covered and what was not. The presence of even a basic policy pushed more trade onto the water. Moneylenders and exchange shops grew where schedules were most reliable. A barge captain could draw a small loan to cover repairs between toll points and repay it from the next cargo payment. A dealer in salt could leave a draft with a trusted shop at the origin and receive silver at the destination with a matching mark on a ledger. That removed the risk of carrying heavy coin along the towpath. Credit made the system move when cash was tight and sped deals that would have waited for a courier. The state took its share without killing the flow. Fees were predictable and re-evaluated by season. In high water with fewer delays, rates could rise slightly. In low water or after floods, they eased to pull traffic back onto the route. Exemptions were narrow and public. Relief grain in a bad season passed free. Timber for public works paid reduced rates. Exceptions made sense because everyone could see why they existed. Backhaul kept boats from returning empty. The same hull that brought grain north hauled iron tools, salt, paper, and finished cloth south. Tow teams earned wages both ways. A yard that carved lock gates in spring carved merchant doors in winter. A kiln that baked culvert brick also baked roof tile. People learned 2 or 3 related trades and filled the calendar with paid days. That spread skills and made villages less fragile. Towns reoriented their streets toward the water. Markets faced quays. Inns set doors a few steps from mooring rings with low benches for the sore backs of tow teams. Bathhouses near lock flights did steady business. Counting houses stood above floodlines and kept dry ledgers when the bank path was a sheet of brown water. Temples and theaters followed wealth and gave crews and traders a reason to linger and spend. culture rode commerce and then paid it back by keeping places lively in quiet months. A simple story shows the multiplier at work. A warehouse started as a shed for spare sacks. The owner added a scale and began to offer quick weighing when the official station was crowded. Boatmen paid a small fee to avoid missing their window. With savings from steady work, the owner built a second shed and leased it to a rope maker. The rope maker supplied tow lines at a discount to boats that weighed at the shed. Captains lined up. Within 3 seasons, the patch of bank became a small yard with jobs for sons and cousins who would have left for the city. The canal paid twice, once in tolls, once in livelihoods. Prices told the system whether it was working. When margins between south and north narrowed but did not vanish, the route was efficient without losing its reason to exist. If margins collapsed, something was wrong. Too much leakage, too many exemptions, or too much direct control choking private initiative. If margins widened into pain, officials loosened fees or released reserve grain. Feedback moved fast because everyone watched the same markets. Corruption never disappears. It is managed. The canal used rotation to limit cozy ties. Toll keepers moved posts every few years and could not serve near their birth counties. Work crews recorded their own hours on slates that were compared to foreman books each week. Inspectors arrived unannounced and carried authority to halt collections until books matched locks. Penalties landed on salaries and posts, not just on pride. People learned that small lies cost them scheduling power they valued more than a few coins. Wages were steady because base load was steady. Lock crews received pay through the winter overhaul months. Dredging teams had contracts tied to volume measured by simple frames suspended from barges. Tow teams were hired by the day, with bonuses for finishing a reach under target time without incident. Children in canal towns learned to count using toll boards and depth poles. Literacy followed ledgers. A system that pays on time creates habits that last when rulers change. The economic spine allowed specialization. Some boats became tribute specialists with reinforced decks and low, safe profiles for heavy sacks. Others chased high-value light cargo and ran tight schedules with small crews. A few became service boats that carried spare planks, pitch, and smith tools, making fast money from breakdowns. Diversity made the flow resilient. If grain dropped in a good harvest year, timber and salt rose. If a drought cut southbound food, northbound tools and cloth filled some of the gap. Policies adapted as technology changed. When early railways appeared near cities, administrators adjusted tolls to keep regional cargo on water where it still had advantage. Heavy, slow goods stayed with the canal. Fast, fragile goods shifted toward rails. Rather than fight the new mode, the canal found a niche alongside it. Ports added transfer ramps and cranes. Some yards even built rail wagons in the off-season using the same carpentry that framed hulls. Money from the water returned to the water. Budgets earmarked a fixed share of tolls for routine maintenance and a smaller share for capital improvements. Lists were public. A town that saw its stretch on the improvement list prepared crews and materials in advance. If a stretch missed its slot due to flood or crisis, it moved to the top of the next cycle. Predictability beat favoritism. Crews trusted the list enough to plan marriages and apprenticeships around busy months. The canal also generated knowledge as an asset. Boat builders refined hulls for specific reaches, keeping draft shallow where silting was most common and flare wide where winds struck. Millers learned to time production to meet convoy schedules, so flour arrived fresh. Merchants learned the art of balancing storage cost against expected price moves. That knowledge circulated at tea stalls, in guild rooms, and on towpaths. It made the system smarter each year without any decree. Finance and law protected the flow against shocks. In a failed harvest year, loan terms for tribute carriers extended automatically by a set number of days. In a flood year, temporary fee reductions took effect at posted thresholds on gauge boards. Debts could be settled in grain at posted rates when silver was scarce. These switches removed panic and kept movement close to normal even when nature misbehaved. The largest economic benefit was invisible. By lowering the cost and risk of movement, the canal widened the radius within which a craftsman or farmer could sell. A town's world doubled. That made investments in skill and equipment sane because buyers were not limited to one market day's walk. The canal turned local talent into regional supply and regional needs into steady work. Wealth attracts trouble, but order kept it in check. Banditry waned not because men grew kinder, but because canal police, signal towers, and steady wages made theft riskier than labor. Fraud at scales lost to audits. Fraud at ounces died in the light of posted rules. The path from village to market became predictable. Predictability is the mother of enterprise. All of this fed back into the maintenance cycle. Tolls paid the dredgers who kept depths true. Stable wages kept skilled crews on banks and in lockhouses. Warehouses and boatyards put spare parts and materials within reach when storms tore at structures. The canal did not rely on a single burst of glory from a ruler. It relied on a living economy that found its own reasons to keep the water open. Money and trade alone cannot hold a system together for centuries. They need rules, offices, and habits that outlive a single generation. They need memory and responsibility that do not wash away in the next flood or regime change. The next part turns to those institutions, the posts, checklists, training paths, and enforcement that made the canal a place where knowledge stayed while people came and went. A waterway that outlives its builders needs memory outside a single head. Roles, rules, and records keep the line steady when people change. Offices define who decides, who watches, and who repairs. Authority is tied to a reach, not to a person. When a keeper leaves, the keys pass with a ledger, a map roll, and a sealed box of gauges. The job continues the next morning without a pause. Each stretch of bank has a named master. His duties are written in short, clear clauses. He owns depth, bank health, lock turns, and safety on his reach. He keeps a daily log with times, drafts, delays, and water levels. Once a week, he sends a copy to the district office. Once a month, a traveling inspector reads the original on the bank, not at a desk. The inspector carries a pole, a plumb line, and a notebook. If a number looks wrong, they walk to the spot and sound the bed together. Standards turn craft into repeatable work. Channel width, side slope, and minimum depth are set in a book the size of a hand. So are towpath height, ring spacing, and bollard strength. Boat builders use the same book for hull length and beam. Lock keepers use it for valve opening steps and safe rates of rise. The book is copied each year with minor changes marked in red. Old editions are tied in bundles and kept. Nothing is lost because people can check what changed and why. Maps are living tools. Surveyors update them at the end of each season. They mark new bars, moved bends, repaired tows, and fresh willows. A clean copy goes to every lock house and toll point. A second copy stays at the district office. A third rests in a central archive far from floodwater. Crews pencil working notes in the margins. Shallow 2 handspans after the third willow. Those notes save hours when fog lies on the water. Checklists keep the calendar honest. Spring has a list for weed scrape and toe packing. Summer has a list for valve oil, hinge wedges, and bank cutbacks after storms. Autumn has a list for dredge targets and brush mattresses before high water. Winter has an overhaul plan with stop planks and cofferdams. A foreman signs each line with date and crew names. If a breach occurs and a line is blank, blame is clear. If a line is signed and work is sound, the crew is defended in the hearing. Money follows rules as well. Tolls and duties feed a maintenance fund that is fenced from other spending. A fixed share buys clay, brush, stone, timber, and iron. Another share pays wages in winter. A small share buys spares for sudden breaks. Disbursements require 2 signatures and a number from the work list. A wallboard in the dispatch house shows the month's purchases and the reach that use them. People who see where money goes accept fees with less anger. Training turns turnover into strength. New lockkeepers shadow the night watch for 2 weeks. New pilots ride with an old hand and write down the 10 worst bends on their stretch. New tow leaders learn knots and line care from a rope maker, not just from a cousin. Foremen send 2 names each year to a short school that teaches sounding, slope repair, and safe signaling. Graduates return with a small pay rise and the duty to teach 3 others. Skill spreads because teaching is part of the job. Rotation breaks cozy ties. Toll keepers move every 3 years and cannot serve near their birth counties. Inspectors swap districts after flood season. Foremen rotate between earthwork, lock support, and dredge teams across several years. Rotation is slow enough that people master tasks, but steady enough that no one owns a loophole. The system knows that familiarity can cook the books if left alone. Audits are simple and sharp. Numbers from the toll house, the lock log, and the weighing station must rhyme. If they do not, collections stop until the mismatch is fixed. The penalty hits post and pay, not only pride. A keeper who fails a second time loses the post and moves to a crew with a shovel. A keeper who runs clean for a year earns a small bonus for his team. Fear is not the only tool. Fair reward holds more people in line than threat alone. Emergencies have a script. A drum pattern or horn code puts the reach on alert. Men muster by name at marked points. Stop planks drop in a lock. Sluices open in a measured order. Tow animals move to higher ground. A runner heads to the next 2 stations with a slate. After the surge passes, the reach holds traffic and checks bank lines by touch and lantern. In the morning, the master writes an after-action note. What failed? What held? What to change? Those notes travel as short bulletins to other reaches. One reach's lesson saves the next from the same mistake. Property and people disputes have a path. A bench under a roof near the water hears claims each market day. A farmer shows his fill mark and the new cut line. A boatman shows his hull scar and the lock log time. The elder reads the posted rule and sets a fair payment from a small fund or from the at-fault party. Appeals go up 2 steps, not 10. Cases do not linger. A far small justice keeps hands on ropes, not on petitions. Water rights are written, not assumed. Upstream mills have hours when they can run at heavy draw. Those hours shift when tribute convoys pass. Feeder gates have guards and locks with 2 keys. 1 key stays with the gatekeeper. 1 key stays at the lock house. No one opens a head gate alone at night. These small controls prevent quiet theft of head pond levels by someone's friend. Tools and spares are standardized. A lock house stores wedges, bolts, hinges, valve paddles, and rope in fixed bins. A yearly count checks that the bins are full before flood season. When a part is used, the log records it and the store issues a replacement on the next supply run. Crews do not improvise unsafe fixes because the right piece sits on a shelf within reach. A missing hinge on a night in rain can throw away a season of careful water budgets. Information moves like a second convoy. Gauge boards report levels at dawn and dusk. A slate from dispatch lists expected drafts and convoy sizes for the day. A copy goes ahead by runner and another by small service punt. The office aggregates delays and sends a note back upstream to spread departures when a jam forms. Small signals prevent large wastes. Water and time both flow in planned sheets, not in bursts. Knowledge is written down so it does not die with a master. A thin manual explains how to smell a damp slope before it shows. Another explains how to spot a spring boil in a toe and how to drill a relief well with gravel. Another explains how to call a scouring run, how long to hold a valve, and when to stop before banks start to chatter. These manuals are revised after each hard season. Shops and houses keep them in plain reach. Ceremony has a use. The opening of navigation each year brings crews, merchants, and officials to the water. A short right marks the first lockage and thanks the people who kept the line alive through winter. Names of crews with clean safety records are read aloud. People remember that their work matters to the whole. Pride, used well, lowers the need for threats later. An unexpected detail carries weight. Many key gates use 2 seals on their chains. One seal belongs to the keeper, one belongs to the inspector. The seals break only when both are present. The cost in minutes is small. The gain in trust is large. Another detail saves days. Depth maps carry a painted stripe to show last year's low water line. If this year's mark rises above that stripe in spring, extra dredging starts without waiting for an order. Simple marks beat long speeches. Communication with towns is continuous. Before a cut takes land or a relief basin floods a field, measurers walk with owners and show marks. Compensation is set and paid in clear units. Bridges replace footpaths cut by new water. Notices warn market stalls to move back before storm season. People accept rules when they are treated as neighbors, not obstacles. That keeps knives sheathed and ropes on bollards. Institutions also plan for change. A 5-year list sets bigger works. A new lock, a raised crest, a fresh bypass cut. The list is public and revised each autumn. If flood wipes out a year's plan, the items slide, not vanish. Crews can plan marriages and apprenticeships around busy months because everyone reads the same plan. Predictability is its own form of pay. A small story shows how memory beats luck. A reach kept failing at the same toe each third storm. Repairs held for a month and then slipped. A clerk reading old notes found a line from a keeper 30 years back. Toe chatters when upstream valve opens fast. The current keeper slowed the first 2 feet of opening on that valve. The toe stayed quiet. The fix was a sentence in a book, not a new wall of stone. These offices, checklists, and habits make a second river beside the first. The first river is water and silt and weather. The second river is rules, names, logs, and shared skill. Together they make a canal that can serve a city for generations. But no rule survives a war by itself, and no ledger can stop a changing age. The system must face crises and new machines that claim to be faster and better. The next part follows those trials and the way the canal bent without breaking when floods, armies, and railways tried to write it off. A canal proves itself under strain, not in calm years. Wars cut towpaths, seized granaries, and burned bridges. Floods erased months of careful dredging in a night. The system survived because it had ways to narrow loss and recover fast. People, not walls, carried that habit from one century to the next. The greatest shocks came from the Yellow River. In some years it rose, burst levees, and climbed onto the plain like a living wall. In other years it changed course and left old beds high and dry. The canal could not cage it, so crews learned to step aside, then reconnect. Temporary cuts bridged new gaps. Old turns were abandoned and marked on charts as hazards. This was not surrender. It was disciplined retreat and measured return. Civil wars and rebellions stressed the line in different ways. Tribute convoys halted when armies took the banks. Locks ran on half crews or not at all. Towns ringed their quays with palisades and kept night watches with more spears than poles. When a front passed, the recovery script began. Inspect scours, replace hinges, fill tow boils with gravel, reopen short reaches first to feed local markets. Long hauls returned only after signals and posts were staffed. Plague and famine added invisible pressure. Crews shrank, horses died, grain rotted in warehouses when rumors kept captains at home. The system responded with reserve labor lists and simple payments in staple food. A man who showed at a bank with a shovel got a day's ration and a coin. This kept minimum maintenance alive until normal payrolls resumed. The habit saved sections that would have failed if left empty. Technology also attacked. Steam and then rails offered speed over land. The canal did not pretend to be faster. It became cheaper for heavy, slow cargo. Administrators aligned tolls with this truth. They cut fees for timber, stone, and grain. They built transfer ramps where tracks met water. A barge slid its load to wagons in an hour. Mixed mode moved more, and the canal kept work without lying to itself. Locks changed with the age. Wooden leaves gave way to iron, then steel. Handspikes met winches and then geared wheels. Later, small electric motors turned valves on set cycles. The principle stayed the same. The effort fell, the speed rose, and safety improved because machines do not tire in the rain. Crews learned new checks. Oil here, grease there, watch the meter, listen for a different sound when a bearing runs dry. Banks changed too. Brush mattresses remained on friendly bends. On hard corners, stone revetments and concrete joined the toolkit. Toe protection used heavier baskets and steel stakes. In problem soils, sheets of driven piling stopped seepage paths from forming under the core. None of this was magic. It was the same logic with better materials. Keep water where it belongs. Give pressure a safe exit before it finds its own. Dredging went from baskets to scoops to mechanical grabs. Early steam dredgers worked the worst bars first and taught navigators new patience. A barge waited while the grab chewed a trench. The next barge moved as soon as the pilot depth was reached. Later, suction dredgers moved mud with pipes instead of muscle. Silt still returned after storms, but the rate of recovery shortened from weeks to days. Administration modernized in steps. Paper logs lived beside new gauges. District offices compiled daily levels and lock turns on wallboards. Then they compiled them on ledgers with copied tables. Much later, the same numbers traveled by wire and then by radio. The purpose never changed. See the system. Predict the next bottleneck. Move water budgets like money between pounds so the most cargo moves with the least waste. Economics shifted at the end of an era. Grain tribute by water ended when rail made the northern capital easier to feed from sea and track. The canal lost its anchor load. For a time it sagged. Private cargo kept some stretches alive. Others fell quiet. The response took years. Local governments funded repairs where traffic still paid. Towns turned quays into markets and warehouses into shops. The waterway changed from spine to network of working limbs. Heritage status brought a different kind of protection. Sections with history and intact structures gained legal shields. Bridges and lockhouses were repaired as much for memory as for movement. Tour boats replaced tributes on quiet reaches. Museums filled former warehouses. This did not feed a capital, but it fed towns with visitors and pride. A canal that once moved grain now moved stories and money in new forms. Water management found new uses for the corridor. Feeder lines and control gates became part of regional flood plans. In dry years, linked ponds and pumps lifted water to urban reservoirs. Some modern transfer projects traced the old alignment because the land already accepted channels and towpaths. The old spine became a conduit for managed flow with meters and remote valves. Ancient geography met modern control rooms without a quarrel. Pollution forced another round of adaptation. Towns grew. Effluent darkened quiet pounds. Fish died and weed choked culverts. The answer was unglamorous. New sewers, settling ponds, regular weed harvesters, rules that tied factory permits to discharge readings at posted boards. It took years of dull enforcement to bring clear water back. When the white paddle test showed 2 arms lengths again, boatmen nodded and markets returned to the quays. Safety culture learned from modern disasters elsewhere. Night passages carried brighter codes. Life rings hung on every bollard pair. School visits taught children to respect tow lines and stay off icy banks. Crews drilled for oil spills with floating booms as they once drilled for snapped lines with stop planks. The canal remained a workplace, not a picture. Workplaces reward habits that never feel dramatic until the day they save a life. Climate swings reopened old lessons. Heavier rains hit some years, longer dry spells hit others. Managers revived few sections on purpose and mapped new relief basins. They lifted head pond margins a hand's breadth where data showed repeated near misses. They added aeration at dead ends to beat summer fish kills. The logic matched an older time. Plan for the worst week, not the average month. A short story shows modernization without ceremony. A lock crew replaced a timber gate with steel. The first week, cycle times improved. The third week, noise rose and a bolt worked loose. The foreman stopped operations, read the manual, and found the torque spec that had been guessed. He retightened every bolt to the posted number and painted a mark on each nut. Photos of the marks went into the log. The noise vanished. The lesson spread by word and by image. Legal forms caught up. Water rights and navigation rules were restated in modern terms. Some stretches became protected heritage zones with low speeds and strict hours. Others stayed commercial with higher limits and larger hulls. Local courts gained clear power to fine, to close, and to force repairs. Appeals had deadlines. The canal benefited from clarity. Traders and visitors adjusted quickly when rules made sense and were enforced evenly. Integration with roads and rails reached a stable mix. Heavy bulk still chose water where depth allowed. Containers rode trucks and trains and touched the canal at planned crossings. Cranes lifted boxes and short-haul barges fed distribution centers near city edges. The goal was no longer to beat rail. It was to keep each mode in its strength and to prevent chaos at the seam. Schedules, as always, did more work than slogans. Education kept context alive. Guides told visitors why a quiet bend sits higher than its field. Pilots taught apprentices to read ripples for shallow fans. Schoolbooks carried diagrams of locks and head ponds. Some students became engineers and returned with math that matched their childhood banks. They designed new sluices that met old goals with fewer parts. The line between memory and design blurred in a healthy way. By the present day, the canal holds many roles at once. It is a transport route on some stretches, a flood tool on others, and a museum and park in many towns. It links industries, markets, and neighborhoods with paths and water views. It also anchors identity. When people fight to repair a bank after a storm, they repeat a pattern older than their grandparents. The work looks different, but the purpose rings the same. The durable insight is simple. Survival came from bending without breaking. When rivers moved, the canal moved. When rulers changed, the offices endured. When technology shifted, the waterway found its niche. Each step kept the core promise alive. Move things safely, predictably, and cheaply along a planned line. This brings us to the heart of the lesson. A project lasts when it is more than stone and water. It becomes a process with anchor demand, modular engineering, seasonal protocol, self-financing maintenance, institutional memory, and calm adaptation. In the next part, these 6 points come together as a clear model for building infrastructure that works for generations. Here is the core idea. The Grand Canal lasted because it was built as a process, not a monument. Stone and water were only the start. The system added rules, rhythms, and roles until movement became reliable under stress. You can use the same pattern anywhere large work must endure. It has 6 parts that hold together like joints in a frame. First, anchor demand. A big system needs a load that does not vanish in a slow year. Grain Tribute was that anchor. It set minimum tonnage, fixed windows, and a reason to clear silt before anyone else cared. The anchor paid for crews in dull months and justified dredging before floods. In modern terms, name the non-optional flow. It can be base power, water, food, waste, or data. Bind the schedule to that flow. When a system knows who it must serve first, it knows why it wakes up early. Second, modular engineering. The canal did not fight hills with brute force. It broke the route into level pounds and moved boat between them with locks. Each lock was a repeatable unit with standard sizes, standard valves, and known cycle times. Bypasses, relief cuts, and fuse sections gave controlled failure paths. A single module could be closed, repaired, and reopened without stopping the river. Design any large project as linked modules with valves and spares. Make failure local. Make repair simple. Keep parts interchangeable so crews can work fast in rain and dark. Third, seasonal protocol. Nature runs on cycles. The canal accepted that truth and wrote it into its rules. Spring floods changed signals and hours. Summer weeds got cut on a schedule. Autumn ran heavy tribute with longer shifts under posted limits. Winter turned chambers into dry boxes for overhaul. Dispatchers built ladders of up and down lockages to reuse head pond levels in drought. The calendar was law because physics was law. Any long system should publish its season book. What opens, what closes, what the safe windows are. Predictability turns weather from a surprise into a plan. Fourth, self-financing maintenance. Tolls were modest, frequent, and earmarked. Money from movement returned to the water as clay, stone, rope, iron, and wages. Logs, slips, and audits tied coins to turns and depth marks. Crews saw where funds went. People paid because the line stayed open. Do the same in any sector. Ring-fence upkeep. Pay the boring bills first. Publish the list. If fees rise, show the added brush, the new hinge, the extra dredge run. Trust grows when cost and benefit meet at the same place on the ground. Fifth, institutional memory. Offices held maps, ledgers, and checklists that outlived keepers and rulers. Rotation kept cozy ties from hardening. Training turned old tricks into short manuals. Inspections happened on banks with poles, not only on paper with stamps. A small bench by the water settled disputes in days, not years. Tools and spares sat in labeled bins in every lockhouse. This is the second river beside the first. It is made of names, roles, and notes. Build it on purpose, write what works, keep old editions, reward clean logs, and fast small justice. A system with memory does not relearn the same lesson after each storm. Sixth, adaptation under stress. Floods moved rivers, wars emptied posts, rails outpaced boats for fast cargo. The canal bent instead of breaking. It stepped aside and reconnected when channels shifted. It lowered fees for heavy goods and built ramps where wagons met hulls. It traded timber gates for steel and added motors to valves without changing the core idea. Later, it took on new roles as flood tool, water transfer line, and heritage park. The rule is simple. Protect the promise, not any single part. When the world changes, preserve function and let form evolve. Put these six together and you get a machine that keeps its word. The anchor demand makes traffic non-negotiable. Modular engineering makes failure local and repair fast. Seasonal protocol matches effort to nature's pulse. Self-financing turns movement into maintenance without begging. Institutional memory saves skill when people move on. Adaptation keeps the promise alive when tools and politics shift. Remove one piece and the frame sags. Keep all six and the line holds when the banks tremble. The model also gives clear measures. A clock, a gauge, and a ledger. The clock is schedule fidelity at locks and staging basins. The gauge is depth and head pond level against target. The ledger is spend against the posted maintenance list. When clock, gauge, and ledger agree for months at a time, the system is healthy. When one drifts, you know where to look. A slow clock hints at signaling and staffing. A low gauge hints at silt and leaks. A hot ledger with flat depth hints at waste. Simple instruments beat grand speeches. Notice how early promises now close. Geography set the problem of moving food north and power south. Locks and feeders solved the step work. Flood tools, fuse banks, and relief cuts kept the line through bad weeks. Protocols, signals, and moorings turned crowds into a sequence. Tolls, warehouses, and boatyards created a budget that never sleeps. Offices, checklists, and rotation kept skill on the bank when rulers changed. Modern ramps, motors, and rules carried the same promise into new ages. Each chapter was a rib. The model ties them into one hull. The lesson scales. A canal is water moved with intent. A grid is electrons moved with intent. A network is packets moved with intent. In each case, pick the anchor load. Build in modules. Live by the calendar. Fund the dull work first. Write the memory down. Bend when the wind shifts. If you want a city or a service to survive, design for the worst week and the next generation, not the best day and the next quarter. The image to keep is plain. A lock crew at dawn reads the board, checks the hinges, oils the valve, and sets the lanterns. A convoy arrives on time. Water rises in measured steps. The gate opens, the boat glides forward, the log gains 2 clean numbers. Money, food, and work move with that quiet motion. That is what durability looks like. It is not loud. It is steady, fair, and ready for rain. Now we have the frame. You can point it at any grand project and ask 6 questions. What is the anchor that keeps it honest? Where are the modules and the spares? What is the season book? How does use pay for care? Who holds the memory when people leave? How will it bend without breaking? If the answers are clear, the project can last. If they are fog, the banks will slump when the first brown water arrives. This is why the Grand Canal still matters. It shows how to turn geography into service and time into an ally. Not by luck, not by one ruler's will, by a pattern that made promises and kept them for 1,000 years. The journey comes full circle, a line of water tied north and south. It fed capitals, kept markets calm, and moved work where it was needed. It survived floods, wars, and new machines. It did so because people treated it as a process they could improve every season, not as a one-time wonder, as a living system with simple rules and steady care. Hold the 6 points in your head as a small checklist, an anchor load that keeps the line honest, modular pieces that fail local and repair fast, a calendar that matches nature, money that returns to maintenance first, offices and notes that outlast any one keeper, adaptation that protects the promise when tools and rulers change. This frame is small enough to repeat and strong enough to guide a city. Think about what that means for our time. A power grid lives or dies by schedule, spare parts, and crews that know the weak poles before the storm. A water system works when treatment plants, valves, and maps talk to each other like lock houses did. A data network runs well when it has baseline traffic, modular routing, and logs that show small issues before they become outages. The lesson travels cleanly from towpath to fiber. The canal also reminds us to measure the right things. On a healthy reach, the clock, the gauge, and the ledger agree. Boats pass on time. Depth holds within a hand's breadth. Spending matches the posted plan. When one drifts, you know where to look. This is how to run anything large without getting lost in speeches or slogans. Pick a few clear instruments, read them daily, act early. There is a human layer under the numbers, pride in clean logs, a habit of fixing small leaks before nightfall, a fair bench by the water where disputes end quickly. Training that turns a trick into a note so the next crew is faster and safer. These things look small. They carry a system across centuries because they replace luck with method. They let people trust a schedule enough to plant, to ship, to invest, and to stay. If you build or manage anything long-lived, start with the worst week in mind. Design your fuse sections, name your relief basins, decide who gets served first, and write it down. Stock spares before the clouds build. Publish your plan and your list of work so the people who depend on you can plan their lives. This is not dramatic. It is what keeps promises when the water turns brown and the wind changes. The Grand Canal is not only an old story, it is a manual written in clay, timber, stone, and ledges. It shows how to turn geography into service and time into an ally. Most of the work is quiet. A hinge adjusted, a bank packed, a window widened at dawn so a convoy can clear before heat. Quiet work changes history when it repeats for 1,000 years. Thank you for watching and listening. If this model helps you see big systems more clearly, stay with the channel. Save this video and share it with someone who builds or runs things. In the playlist, you will find related deep dives on long-lived projects and the rules that keep them alive. Next, we can break down another spine of a civilization and test the same 6 points. Tell me in the comments which one you want first. A wall that became a border system, a canal that sliced a continent, or a road network that turned fields into a state. Your ideas shape the next script. Subscribe if you want more clear, practical stories about how complex things actually work. New episodes follow the same promise: simple frames, concrete details, and lessons you can use. Until next time, may your clocks run true, your gauges stay steady, and your ledger match the ground.